we'll get underway. So I've got we've got Peter VK3MV on. There he is. Hello, Peter.
Good evening, all.
So tonight we're channeling we're channeling that just fell on its face. We're channeling Adam and Jamie. We're going to do a bit of myth busting along the way. So just by way of introduction, what we're going to try and cover tonight is a little bit of history. Peter's agreed, and Peter's going to take us through a little bit of a potted history on the history of radio licensing in Australia from 1905 to the present day. So we've actually got the one person probably out of the ACMA who has the huge amount of knowledge around radio licensing. So and then we'll head into a little bit of a really short presentation on the class license, and then head into question and answer session around the class license. So that's the sequence of things today. So I'll hand over to Peter just to do a bit of an introduction, and then head into licensing history in Australia. So over to you, Peter.
Well, thank you, Justin, and to Reast, let me come along, because usually I'm on the other side. Anyway, wireless telegraphy. An act relating to wireless telegraphy, assented to on the 18th of October 1905. And I think the people who put together the Constitution were pretty far-thinking and very strategic, because in the Constitution it gave power to the Commonwealth of Australian Parliament to make legislation relating to telegraphic and telephonic-like services. And the first bit of legislation came out was the October of 1905. And wireless telegraphy definition includes all systems of transmitting and receiving telegraphic messages by means of electricity without a continuous metallic connection between the transmitter and receiver. And that's pretty important, because they're talking about transmitters and receivers, so it captures everything. Anyway, the beauty about this act, it's only two pages.
We got Peter on the screen.
Anyway, 2 pages. The current act, I think, is over 700 pages. Probably understandable given the rapid pace of technology. Anyway, the act sort of was periodically amended. Probably the next amendment was 1919, and generally every 10 years there's a little bit of a fix-up. And that continued on all the way through the 20s and 30s, and certainly in the 40s. And in 1983, there was a ground change of changes to the Act, and it was the first one to introduce the concept of equipment requiring to have standards. Now, right from the start, it was never intended for amateurs or experimenters to be captured by this standards arrangement. However, more recently, there is a little bit of a sting in the tail, in that if equipment has an internet type conductivity connected to it, it is required to comply with the requirements of EMI for internet, Ethernet type cabling. So 83 did quite a few things in what the responsibilities were for inspectors, their powers. It also included the concept of I've lost my stream of thought. Anyway, it's not all that important. But anyway, moving along, and there was a ground change that really started to take the shape of where the modern legislation is now in 1992. And that Act introduced the concepts of spectrum licensing and class licensing, and the continuation of apparatus licensing. Now, the word apparatus is actually goes way, way back. And I think that people who are drafting this were saying, well, we just can't call them those telegraphic thingies. So they put a name to a box or a piece of equipment. So it was just called apparatus. That still is in existence today. But the concept of now going to spectrum licensing, which probably really doesn't affect amateurs all that much, but certainly class licensing did. And one of the drivers was the fact around leading up to 92, there was something like 700,000 licenses in the licensing system. And it was creaking. It was really, really creaking. And so the decision was made to, where there were lots of equipment that were common to every body in terms of equipment, frequency bands, power levels, etc., could all be grouped together. For example, mobile phones. Before 1992, each phone had to be licensed in some way. And it was a particular unique licensing arrangement for telcos. But there were large industry groups that were also captured by the thought of changing from apparatus licenses, individual apparatus license to class licensing, and for example, aeronautical. But aeronautical is not just planes, it was also the ground services at an airport, either for safety reasons, but also for just ensuring the smooth running of an airline. Others which were quite laid down, CB radio, etc., etc. So we moved into the new dynamic of having different arrangements for different sorts of equipment. Anyway, one of the things that did come about in 2004 was a review of the amateur service. I don't know if you can recall, there was a fairly big study, and there were presentations in each of the capital cities. I, in fact, went to one in Hobart, which I found was one of the better meetings that took place. Anyway, that introduced the concept of three-tier arrangements for licensing qualifications: the foundation, standard, and advanced. And that's where we are still today. Anyway, moving along, in 2000, well, I preface this by saying the concept of moving to class licensing actually for the amateur service actually started in 2017. And at the time, the then minister decided, oh, we'd like to have a new act. So let's, and a lot of government agencies, particularly, and industry groups, all inputted to this. But what caught my eye at the time was the fact that the ACMA put in a submission to government to assist in their considerations, and they flagged the issue of moving the amateur service into class licensing. And I can remember that was, I was in Adelaide for the AGM, WIA AGM, and I was sitting in the airport busily typing away a response or a draft response from the WIA. Anyway, I think we'll leave the history part and let's get into the guts of it. And the first thing I must say is read the Floman class license. Have a copy, because if you don't read it, you can trip yourself up. And that's where we'll try and take you through a series of slides to show you the structure and some of the elements that are in this class licensing. Over to you, Justin.
Fantastic. Thanks, Peter. Okay, so I just reiterate what Peter said, and I'll add a document to this. The class license, I'm happy to, and I'll put these links into the chat and the video description. But the other document that I'll emphasise here is the explanatory statement.
Yep, I was going to mention that.
Now, all bits of legislation have to have an explanatory statement because that is the package of documentation that goes to, I'm looking at Jim here, who's deep in this right at the moment with other bits and pieces. But the explanatory statement, if you are wanting some idea of why they put something into the legislation and why they put it the way they put it, the explanatory statement is the statement that the lawyers go to try and work out what the intent of that legislation was.
Yep.
So,
in fact, they're a precursor. The precursor document is drafting instructions to the Office of Legislative Drafting, and it's in a narrative, and it explains without going into great detail what you're trying to achieve and probably some considerations. And the explanatory statement is for non-technical parliamentarians to try and understand about these radio thingies.
The layman's language for those people who end up voting on the legislation, because it obviously has to go through the various houses of parliament, etc. So I'll put the link in for those two, but the key one is the explanatory statement is worth a read. I warn you, it's a pretty dry read, so if you're having trouble sleeping, probably have it next to your bed, and you can refer to sort of a clause a night. Class license. Everything is under the 1992 Act, which Peter mentioned earlier. So everything is drawn from that. Just thought I'd remind people, in the Radcom 1992 Act, there are three types of license, and Peter referred to all three of these. And I just, in a potted summary, a spectrum license, the definition, if you like, is it's a license that covers a geographic area or a frequency band. That's the definition in the actual Radcom, and it's obviously a summary of that. E.g., mobile phones is a good one, and the mobile phones, the spectrum licensing is a huge revenue source for the government. I'll leave it at that. The apparatus license, which Peter talked about, and how the apparatus license came into being. Currently, there are 16 different types of transmitter license and 5 different types of receiver license under the apparatus license. there is this concept of it being an assigned apparatus license, which is it's a particular frequency, or a non-assigned license, which is a shared frequency. And a good example is the amateur repeaters and beacons remain as an apparatus license on a particular frequency, etc., in a particular location. Class licenses. There are 15 types of class licenses. So I've mentioned amateurs, LIPD, CB, marine, etc., 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 etc. There are 15 types of them, and that is where we have landed. We've moved from apparatus license into class licenses. So any questions whilst we're going along? Because we'll try and answer them as we go along.
What's LIPD?
Low interference potential device. So if you've got, it's a good example, 433 megs, 915 megs, etc., etc. They are low, very low power devices used for all sorts of things, and that's a good example of where they're used.
Weather stations and all those sort of things, how they go back to some sort of device. Yeah.
So why is there a license type for a receiver?
I might hand to Peter on that one.
Well, certain receivers are of tremendous importance, particularly in the maritime and aeronautical where they sectors where they need to have absolute certainty of non-interference to these safety of life services, and therefore maritime coast stations, for example, they've got to, so they are effectively licensed so that they can appear in registers and be visible there, so that to alert to other radio communications users that in this facility there is this critical, generally safety of life type service, and therefore we will protect the receiver from interference.
Is the radio quiet zones in there as well?
Probably, you could probably say they are. That's the square kilometre arrays and those. There are some other sites around Australia that have received these sorts of dedicated receivers. Some are actually in the register and some are not.
Can I ask you a question? I asked this question a number of times during the whole development of this structure, and that is, why was no provision made for the licensing of individuals? Now, we as radio amateurs had to be responsible for what we were doing. It was not an apparatus that we were responsible for. It was how we used the apparatus, which was an individual. Now, in the aeronautical thing and the maritime thing, a lot of similarities. That it was the individual that was licensed, not the equipment, nothing to do with the equipment.
Yep. And essentially, well, essentially that was always implicit in the license, that there were behaviours, expected behaviours that were there. It was always there. It still is in the class license. It just means that they, rather than individually license it, and therefore there is some cost in maintaining a system of individual licensing when there's really no change over many years other than potentially new bits of spectrum added, but the behaviours and processes that surround all of that and operating procedures remains the same. So there's no real need to have an individual licence anymore. But there are some costs in maintaining licence databases.
I don't see it the other way around. I see it that there is a cost in not licensing the individual who is responsible for what they're doing.
Yeah.
And issuing this broad, generalised licence that, you know, you have no discipline or responsibility for what happens as an individual within that big license. Whereas if you're licensed individually, you're responsible for what happens in your station and your area.
I agree with you, but I can tell you that when the Spectrum Pricing and Management Review in 91, 92 took place, these were some of the philosophical arguments that were running around at the time. And but we've landed where we've landed. The same could apply to CB radio. There's still some behaviour issues that are embedded in there, or what you shouldn't be doing, using it in such a way to threaten somebody or whatever. But it's in the legislation. If you've got a qualification that allows you the entry into using amateur spectrum in a way that's in a responsible way. Everybody has a collective responsibility. Whether you have an individual license or it's covered by one license, effectively, there is only one paper license, and that's held by the lawyers in the ACMA. But it's within the class. And effectively licensing within the maritime area and in the aeronautical, it's still a qualifications-based usage of a piece of spectrum. And it's a philosophical argument. I accept that.
Okay. Any other questions? No? Okay. So we're going to dive into the class license, a few slides here. A class license, the definition out of the Radiocommunications Act is that it is a license that has conditions or parameters associated with it. So in the case of the amateur class license, there are 5 parameters or conditions that are placed on us. And so you need a qualification, you need to use a call sign, there are some permitted frequency bands, some transmitter output power limits, and compliance with electromagnetic energy operating requirements around the amateur station relating to electromagnetic radiation. So I'm going to go into each of these in a little bit more depth in each slide. So if you go into the class license, section 8 and 9 talks about being a qualified person and recognising qualifications. So that's the levels and also the overseas licence equivalents that are in place. So section 8, you need to be a qualified person to actually operate a class licence. It talks about recognising qualifications, the recognition certificate. This was the creation of the recognition certificate that replaced the AOCP. It talks about visiting Australia, and if you're not an Australian resident, it actually extended the period of time that somebody who is not in Australia to 365 days. It wasn't that long before. It was 3 months, wasn't it, Peter?
Yep. 60 days.
Too much. So it expanded to 12 months. So somebody from overseas can operate in Australia for a year without having to actually get a license. After that, they need to think about getting a license. Or you hold a recognised overseas qualification, and there's a list of recognised overseas qualifications that's available on the ACMA website. And you're assigned a call sign on behalf of that particular country that you're coming from's administration. It talks about recognising the qualification. So this is where it defines advanced standard and foundation and the equivalents. it also defines the overseas license equivalents, and they're all published on the ACMA website, and makes a comment that the ACMA can cancel anything at any stage. So, yeah.
Yep. I'd make one comment in relation to overseas equivalents. Some of those qualifications levels in other countries are in fact out of date and probably are in need of a review, and that was always something that was always going to be on the back burner, and it really hasn't come to the front as yet, but it probably will in time. I'll just leave it at that. But broadly, anybody who has a license or a qualification issued by another administration, you can operate now for 365 days using your, say, home call sign. However, if you want to take out get an Australian call sign, you have to apply for that, and there is a process to evaluate the equivalency arrangements on a more formal basis.
Cool.
So what's the reciprocal of that? If I'm wanting to go overseas, what have I got?
Well, Australia has got a number of long-standing recognition arrangements, particularly with the US, the UK, where we've entered into agreements, and I can't remember all the other countries. So there's not all that many. Oh, New Zealand is another one. But what is really effectively taken over is the CPT arrangements that apply in Europe. Because of the number of countries that are all gathered together, going across from one country to another, borders caused all sorts of problems if you wanted to operate on 2 miles down the road and there's a country boundary. So they decided to come up with this harmonised amateur radio equivalent certificates, I think they're called them. Yeah, and
not the question. The question is, what do I have to do if I'm wanting to get something? What bit of paper or what evidence do I need to start the conversation to say I want to go to France and operate?
Okay. Can I get you to hold that question?
I can hold the question.
Because we actually talk about that in a couple of slides' time.
Okay, because it was just the vice versa of what you just talked about.
And it is one of the challenges that we have with the ACMA right at the moment. And there's a challenge slide coming up. So it's about the documentation. So we go into that, Linda. So hold that thought.
Motivation not great. I saw them out somewhere and Justin told me I can't operate it.
No, well and truly. So hold that thought, because we do have a slide on that. So condition number 2 is what they call call sign identification. So Schedule 4 of the class license deals with the ACMA may assign a call sign to a person. The interesting thing here is in legislative terms, they don't use must very often. But in this particular class license, there is the ACMA must assign a call sign to a person.
I'm just reading it here on the legislation.
So it's just interesting, the use of may and must, because they usually use may, not must.
But you'll find that in the class license generally there, where it is a requirement, you can either do legislation in all the things you can do, and at the same time say, well, these are the things you can't do. So the words shall, must, there is no option. You have to abide by this. But it also swings back the other way, what the regulator has got to do as well. Just reading legislation, you shall not, or you may. Where there is nothing, don't assume that it's okay because it's not mentioned. It could be covered in a policy document, which is the other information that is on the ACMA website.
And there are some policy documents that we'll go into as part of the package of class license. So in the class license, it specifies there are 5 conditions that we need to meet for us to be able to operate. And so we'll go through those, and then there's a slide after that around the operation procedure and a few other things which are in other documents. So person applies to the ACMA, call signs are signed, application can be made, etc., etc. So it goes through the process in the actual class license of what the ACMA is expecting. The assignment must be consistent, obviously, with ITU radio regulations. They need to obviously assign you with Australian call signs and all sorts of things. So need to notify the person in writing, and there's some review provisions in there as well. So that's the condition. You need a call sign. So you need a qualification and you need a call sign. First 2 conditions. Still awake? I'm not hearing snoring, so class license condition number 3. Okay, so this is permitted frequency bands. Now, this is a little bit complex. It's about and Peter, chime in here, because I refer to this as power density measurements more than anything, and it specifies bandwidth and also some powers around those bandwidths. So which can be a little bit confusing, but it's bandwidths and frequency bands that are set for each level of the license, the foundation, standard and advanced. And I don't know whether you want to add any more to that, Peter.
Yeah, it's rather than define it in just a straight power level, which just assumes that it's just a carrier without modulation. But once you start modulating it, it's spread out a bit, and there's a power limit in respect to the bandwidth that you're operating. So this gives it, in fact, more flexibility to operate on some exotic modes which have not been developed yet. But you just can't whack in and expect, I can run a kilowatt. It doesn't quite work that way.
Correct. So this defines what we've got. We've got a qualification, we've got a call sign. We now know where we can operate. And the bandwidths we can operate on. And there was a little bit, there was also some uniformity put into this across, I think they took the opportunity to resolve there were some discrepancies between particular license levels and particular bands, and they standardised this across the board. So yeah. Any questions on this?
Can you explain it? Because they all look the same.
Oh, well, they are. You're just adding more bands and the bandwidth requirement for those extra bands, and there are some nuances around DX bands. So yeah, it's that they are expansions. Each one of those, obviously, as you get more access to more frequency bands and higher bands.
I'm interested in the watt per 100 kilohertz. It's the same for every license classification. So
it is.
Explain that. I don't understand it.
We could be here all night trying to get it. You'd have to. I'd have to reread some of the wording again myself, so I'll pass on that one. It might be the subject of a further discussion.
DATV night.
Can I pose a curiosity, and I don't know the history of it, but as someone who's got a licence in the last 3 years and each year done the study and upgraded,
yep.
I'm I'm curious about the thinking or the methodology behind why, say, someone on a foundation license can't access the bands or on a standard license and so on, moving up. I'm just curious, are particular bands close to other services where there's more risk of interference, or is it just to encourage people to do this and get their license?
Peter can probably give you the history of it. I'm not sure that there was too much science in it, but there may have been. Peter?
Certainly at the review in 2004, the introduction of a foundation licence, as I recall, there was a lot of flack from existing amateurs about this. And the ACMA was committed to introducing an entry-level licence without too many restrictions, because, and that was presented by the WIA and a number of other amateur radio organisations, wanted this to happen. And coming out with particular bands at the time was placating all the parties and still maintaining the desire to introduce this particular level of licence, which at the end of the day is pretty popular.
And Peter, ours was primarily based on the RSGB or Ofcom arrangements, weren't they?
Yeah. That's where it was taken from, and particularly the power levels were, I think, were screwed down to placate everybody. And I would be sympathetic to any moves to increase the power levels for foundation licenses, but not by a huge amount.
And when the foundation licence was brought in, there was very much a focus, and you'll see this in the syllabus, on safety and reducing the potential for interference. If you look at the syllabus questions, there are 5 of those safety questions and 5 of those interference questions. And the only other one that gets that number of questions is the regulation side of it, which is wound into the licence. Sorry, Peter.
Yeah, it was interesting at the time that we were trying to balance of, effectively, what it was an operator type licence rather than a technical qualification, but we had technical subject in that operator type environment, and that's why. But safety was still paramount there, including electrical safety and all those sorts of issues that we felt responsible at the time. It was striking a balance between safety and usage and utility of the particular qualification.
Thank you.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Jim. Any further questions? Yep, Greg.
I imagine if higher power comes along, the 1 watt per 100 kilowatt
kilohertz
may need modified.
amendment. Yes. Absolutely. All right. Condition number 4 was transmission output power levels. So it was set, and this is what we were just talking about. Foundation was 10 watts peak. Standard for the sideband modes, 100 watts peak, and everything else was a mean power or an average power of 30 watts, and then advanced is the same thing for sideband modes, and then it bumps up the mean power to 120 watts. There is some exceptions to that. The 2200 metre band and also the 630 metre band, there is some limitations there in place. Now, bear in mind, antennas at those 2 particular bands are incredibly inefficient. So to get to 1 watt EIRP on 2200 metres and 5 watts on 630 metres is a significant amount of work. So yeah, that's the power, and we're talking about, in most cases, we're talking about peak envelope power, or in the case of those FM type modes, constant carrier modes, it's 30 watts and 120 watts. So.
And I might add that CW actually falls into the PY category, so it's 120 watts.
So yeah. So that's our fourth condition, is output power. Any questions? No? Okay, fifth condition is our electromagnetic emission requirements. So Schedule 1 of class licence specifies those requirements. They are aligned with the ARPANSA current standard. So if you're familiar with the ARPANSA standard, then you're a whole lot more informed than most amateurs, can I just say. There's slightly different measurements for the HF versus the VHF and above, the microwave type bands. Obviously, there's higher power levels and higher emission levels in the as you go up in frequency. It specifies the low risk, which is below 100 watts, and the high risk, which is above 100 watts. And there are some requirements around that it specifies being greater than 10 metres above ground, average power of less than 3200 watts, etc., etc. So that takes into account the gain of the antenna, where the position of the antenna, what type of antenna, etc. Specifies that records need to be kept, especially in the high risk area, need to be calculated and used. And I'll just point to our last DATV night. I outlined there's a great article in not the latest AR magazine, the one before that, which is around the EME requirements and the EME calculator that the WIA has permission to use from the RSGB. So there is a little flow chart which enables you to go through and go, I'm running this amount of power, it's this type of antenna, etc., etc., and you can key your way through this little flow chart. And it tells you then, okay, you need to keep records, you need to calculate, etc., etc., or you meet the requirements and you don't have to do anything else. So there is a great article that I point you at in the AR magazine around that. And if you were here at the Tassie HammerCon, Phil Waite, VK2 ASD, did a little presentation on it. On that chart, and also the calculator, that was when we launched the calculator actually, and announced that we had the WIA had permission to use that particular calculator.
What's the definition of not accessible?
Peter?
Yeah, generally not within your property boundary. You've got to keep your energy levels required. I'll just make one comment about where we've mentioned below 100 watts. That is mean power, average power. It doesn't take into account the mode of operation or anything like that. So in fact, the actual power that you're running is in addition to, it considers the mode of operation, whether it's sideband, CW, blah, 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 and the time element of how long you're transmitting for. So these factors come into fact that if you're if you're the average ham that runs 100 watts PEP, no matter what class of license, you're really not going to be in any great worry about it. There's a couple of things that we are now starting to develop within the WIA, and that will be an advisory committee that will take some very knowledgeable people in this field and provide a better guideline and to assist the amateur community here in Australia how you deal with this particular issue. And that will include the issue of definitions of property boundary and access and so forth. So it's still a work in progress. We're having trouble, I say trouble, we've got a lot of things happening in the WIA in that, and it's just another one of these things of getting people with the time to sort of nut it out. But the use of the calculator gives you a pretty good idea. Whilst I'll say, if you're a foundation licensee, you're pretty well okay. For all others, the danger area starts to come for, I would say, mobile operation, particularly on, say, 2 metres, and somebody wants to put a 100-watt amplifier in the boot of the car with the antenna stuck on the glass of the rear windscreen. You're in danger area for any passengers sitting inside the car. So it's got to be nutted through with a lot more definitive advice, which will include that access one. One of the interesting things, you have to, we're looking at some form of statement that an amateur can say, I have considered all the requirements of it and I am apply to the low risk sector. And that might mean a statement that an amateur may make in writing and stick it somewhere, so that my biggest concern has always been, and that's why I have made myself a statement defining the characteristics of my station, the equipment I'm using, the power I'm using, etc., to avoid the knock on the door from a neighbour who says, those antennas have caused my daughter's leukemia. So how do you defend yourself? And I can turn around and say, well, I have considered the matter. I believe I fall within the guidelines provided by the government. And here's a statement I've made. I've dated it and signed it. You're in a better defensive position. But look, it's still work in progress.
And certainly as we try and pursue high power, there is an acknowledgement that we need to bring amateurs up to a much greater level of education around the risks, and that's part of the process that Phil Waite and the Education Committee is working through. And the chart, the keyed out chart, the flow chart, is the first stage of that. The tool, by all means, and I'll put a link in the video description around the RSGB tool, EME tool. It's relatively easy to use. It has lots and lots of the standard antennas that amateurs will find in their backyards. So it's not a case of having to go down to, antenna design and all of that sort of stuff. It has a library of common antennas that are in amateurs' backyards. And so in most cases, you can put those in. You can put in some of the parameters, the measurements to fences and all sorts of stuff, and it will give you an idea out. So it's not a bad thing to look at and at least familiarise yourself with. So yeah, okay, that's our 5 conditions. So our EME EME's the 5th of those conditions, and that's the ones that are specified in the class license. Now there are some rules and conditions which are supplemental to this, not specified in here, but they are referred to in here. And those, the rules and the conditions which are specified are the use of call signs. So this is where it brings in that you need to actually identify every 10 minutes. Around about supervising people who operate your station. That's where they introduce that you can use the AX call sign on those days. All about contest call signs and the introduction of contest call signs and special events where we are using particular call signs. And that's also where they define the VK0 and VK9 usage. I'll go into that again later in a few slides' time. This is where they specify that the purpose of transmissions there's no financial gain from it. There are some transmit conditions around it. No encoding, no encryption. That's where that's specified. No advertising. They have removed the entertainment provision though. That used to be in there.
So you can tell
Yep.
Excellent.
Yeah. So you can now tell jokes and not worry about it. And not worry about the RI knocking on your door saying, I didn't like that joke.
You shouldn't have told me that.
Sorry, Greg.
I don't see encryption, but I'm wondering what encoding means.
No, the same thing. That's my word.
There is one what is allowed, and that is in the emergency communications WISN, has secure communications, which is encrypted, which is allowed for with in the class license for training, for actual deployment and also training. It's not used very often, but if it's there, it is as good a quality as you can get. It's got a rolling code, it moves it every 24 hours. And it's been designed by a couple of engineers who work for DSD. But the other one for encoding in relation to satellites, amateur satellites and telemetry and control and command, that's where encryption is allowed. But in all other cases, it's not on. But most of the digital communications now, who knows?
Okay, John.
Those mesh network power meters that they're putting in, they use a kind of a frequency hopping to an encrypted algorithm. Is that encoding? Or is that, I don't think it's encryption because they're not sending
No. It's just an encoding mechanism.
And can I just say they are on ISM bands, they're not on amateur bands.
Yeah. So does that mean we can't do the same thing?
We could do the same thing, we just wouldn't be able to do the encryption side of it if there was any encryption involved.
Ham radio trunking.
But there you go. Well and truly. You know.
Justin, I'm not sure I understand the difference between encryption and encoding.
Sorry, the encoding word here is my word. The conditions say I think it says encryption, doesn't it, Peter?
I think it does. I'm just going to find the particular page
on the presentation.
Okay, well, what is meant by encryption?
Well, my interpretation, and this is only my interpretation, is it is not a form that is in common use that obviously the ACMA can decode.
So if I invent a new computer
and open source it
or whatever
And publish it.
and publish it,
no, I keep it to myself and a couple of mates.
that's
We'll use that for experimentation on a particular frequency.
I would suggest that might come under the encryption side, well and truly.
When you look at digitisation, that's a form of encoding.
But commonly available. And Peter, chime in here.
If you can decode it, then it's fine.
Correct. If they can decode it, yeah, I don't have an issue at all.
I think it's if other people can decode it.
Oh no, correct.
Yeah. I wouldn't make a big deal about all of this because technology and the digital world that we're rapidly moving through, you may find that regulations are lagging behind, and the next iteration of the class license may be completely different because of technology changes. I don't think it's a real issue.
Will never go.
Oh no,
The
correct.
law enforcement and security agencies want to be able to.
But
Here you're talking about your colonoscopy on 80 metres.
But are you
Is that what you were going to say?
I don't do HF.
Oh, okay.
no, but does that confuse it or answer it, Martin?
No, I think I just ignore it.
Yeah. No. Well, and if you then publish that, and I suppose WSJT is a good example. It's all open source. So if the ACMA wants to decode WSJT transmissions, they can download the application and do it. So yeah, it is.
They won't know who's sending it because they haven't got the address of the licensee. We won't go into that.
But
ACMA do.
But they do. That's the issue.
They haven't got an up-to-date address.
No. Okay. That's a good point. So some of the other conditions there, and Peter mentioned this earlier, the emergency services operation and training, and also that's an exception for using encryption. The interesting thing about the emergency services operation is they specify that you only need to ID every 30 minutes if you're using it for emergency services. So I just find that an interesting nuance.
Yeah, the whole operating procedure in WISN is effectively they don't use their own call signs. They usually have call signs that are appropriate to the particular point, location, checkpoint 5 and wants to talk to checkpoint 7 and all those sorts of things. They refer to them because it's easier than trying to communicate with somebody who knows at a particular checkpoint or there's an issue at a particular checkpoint, rather than trying to, which call sign was at that particular checkpoint. So it's abbreviated call signs, I think, is the terms they've used, and that's allowed for.
Yep. Okay. Cool. Greg.
I've often wondered during the broadcast on Sundays, there's not an ID every 10 minutes.
Yes, there is.
Yeah.
Yes, there is. Yes, there is.
Subliminal.
No.
No.
There's an ID every 10 minutes.
VK7 RHT. VK7 RHT.
No, it's not that, Harry. It's not that. There is a VK7 WI every 10 minutes.
Okay, no worries. So there is no exception, is what I guess I'm asking.
No. Apart from emergency services operation, where it's every 30 minutes. Okay. Well and truly. No.
So whoever drafts up the broadcast slips in one.
You got it.
Every 7
slips in 2 because it's every 10 minutes and it's 30 minutes long. Okay. So.
Well, it's more interesting if you're using Fusion, where the timeout timer is automatic. It's set for 3 minutes, and you can't get into that part of Yasu's architecture. So a VK3 guy said, "Okay, how are we going to do the broadcasts on FM or whatever?" But the timer resets every 3 minutes. With if there's no input, it resets. So that's exactly what they've done, is they insert a space so that the timeout timer can work. So there's workarounds for all sorts of things and problems.
No, well and truly. I love it.
That's the same for DMR as well.
Correct.
Sunday morning broadcast, they have to reset the,
correct.
the audio every 2 minutes, I think it is.
Spot on. So interference and stereo emissions are also specified in the rules and licenses, and this is where they They specify that you are not allowed to cause harmful interference. And there is also some additional restrictions around the 3 gig not operating in spectrum licence areas and not operating in radio quiet zones. Now, for those who don't know, we have a radio quiet zone here in southern Tasmania, which is around Mount Pleasant Radio Observatory, 23 centimetres and above. So, because I've had to include that in the SOTA manual.
Need to look into that one, Ricky, for a couple of weeks' time. Yeah, we might be.
So yeah, that's. It's a decent distance. It's well and truly past and way past, down into the Huon. So yeah, for those who don't know, and it does specifically say 23 centimetres. It actually has the 23 centimetre band. Well and truly. Interesting question.
I guess that means party's over.
Better to ask for forgiveness.
Moving on. So there are some administrative arrangements which are in place. So these are administrative arrangements. So these are the as close as you're going to get to an operating manual. And if you're studying for your regulations, this is one of the documents I point you at. It specifies things like, obviously, what amateur stations can be used for, which is part of the radio regulations requirements, comes straight out of the ITU radio regulations. It talks about the control and identification of amateur stations, so your identification, emergency services, portable operations, so the difference when you're operating portable around your operating procedure. No encryption and scrambling. That's actually what it says. So that's the wording. It's not encoding. So I apologise for that. They were my words. Retransmission. No third-party messages. So we are not allowed third-party messages, but there is an emergency communication exception to that.
Third-party message. Sorry.
Passing on a message for a third party.
Yeah. Okay.
So yeah. Club call signs, it also addresses the club call sign, talks about club call signs have to be assigned to a natural person, and a natural person is a legal entity, so it's an actual person, a real person. Connection to the internet, talks about things that are connected to the internet. You have to let them know when you change your contact details, and what the variations in operating procedure around different locations. So now, can I just say this is as close as you're going to get to an operations manual. The other things that are specified in them, the concept of there being primary and secondary users and not causing harmful interference to primary users if you're a secondary user. Emission modes and emissions. So this is, again, it reiterates the spurious emission limits and gives you the formula for spurious emissions. What you need to do in distress and safety situations. So this is where it defines Mayday being a issue to life versus a pan, which is an urgency signal. The obligations that you've got if you hear a Mayday signal or a pan, etc. The voice operating procedures, so this is where it actually specifies how to call CQ, how to respond, etc. So this is the stuff we go through in the practical for those who've been through a practical assessment. there is a little bit around other modes, using, if you're doing a test transmission, the fact that you have to identify yourself even if you're using, you're doing a test transmission and using a dummy load to do a test transmission. And this is also where it defines phonetic alphabet and the Q codes. So, yeah. So this is as close as, now, who remembers?
Dummy load?
Sorry?
You've got to identify into a dummy load.
Still radiating.
You're still radiating.
Hate it. The days when 10
In fact,
did open.
many of my antennas.
From the UK to Rhodesia on a dummy load.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
It was a very good dummy load.
Great antenna.
Yeah,
well,
many of my antennas I probably class as dummy loads. That's another story.
Much of a dummy loader that's radiating.
Now, last,
absolutely wrong.
but even if you're,
What are you talking about?
probably
I
more-
do.
more
I'm in the RF industry, mate.
more about. Okay. Okay. Yeah, you can continue this later.
Sort it out in the car park.
Probably wish they could do that in Parliament, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Just the final slide, and can I just say this is for Linda. Overseas and visiting amateurs in reverse. HARIC, which is the harmonised amateur radio requirements. That's what HARIC stands for. So if you are then travelling, you need a couple of documents, which is a recognition certificate or your AOCP, which is equivalent. And if it's a recognition certificate, then you also need your Callsign certificate as well. That's an issue, and I'll go into that in a minute. So if you're travelling, you need to, in the New World Order, have a couple of documents or your AOCP. And your AOCP actually has your Callsign on it, as well as your licence level, as well as the CEPT.
AOCP doesn't have Callsign.
Does it?
Station licence. National qualification.
Oh no, that's correct. That's correct. So you then need the administrative document that the ACMA sent you. Okay, same story with the current arrangements. There is an issue with that, which I'll go into in a sec. Now, the interesting thing in here, and I just put this in, this is a bit more of an intrigue more than anything else. The instruments are compatible, need to be compatible with, obviously, human rights provisions, because we are signatories to treaties, and we are specifically signatories to the ITU treaties, which are UN sanctioned documents. And so to be compatible, they provide the right to freedom of expression by maintaining the ability of amateur licensees to exercise that right through the operation of amateur stations. Just thought that was an interesting.
I think it basically means that you've got a right to pursue your interest using radio communications, and therefore your human rights are being protected. It doesn't mean that you've got freedom of expression that I can say anything I like while operating a station. It's two different things here. So it's really only aimed at you're exercising your right to participate.
Yeah, with your hobby. Yep. Now, the other thing that was brought in with the class license was if you want to operate high power, which you can, you need to apply for a scientific license.
It's on a case-by-case basis.
And that's a yearly license. That's an annual license, and there is a fee associated with the scientific license.
It's an apparatus license.
Do our previous permits lapse?
Good question, Rex. I'm not sure. Rex just asked, Peter, do our previous high power licenses lapse?
Yes. If you already effectively, yes, you'd have to renew it under the new arrangements.
So it's a big license.
Correct.
That is as it stands at the moment. We're obviously pursuing this to get a more equitable arrangement. But anything to do with high power is like a lightning rod for the regulators and governments.
What's the definition of the high power? What level? Greater than?
No, greater than the advanced license levels.
Right.
Well and truly.
400 watts PEP.
Now, the other thing I'll just point out here in this last dot point is amateurs that come over can operate, obviously, for those 12 months. But when somebody travels overseas, the HARIC CEPT equivalents only apply to advanced licensees, not foundation and standards. You can't actually operate overseas if you...
Wasn't the old system like that too? Where you only advanced can
it was only advanced.
No, it's only ever been advanced.
Yeah, there is one available for foundation licensees in the CEPT arrangement. Australia's never applied to the CEP to have that included. It's probably something that down the track we could do. And the reason why standard licenses are not there, there's no standard license across the CEPT, although different countries do have a standard equivalent. But within the HARIC arrangements, there's only advanced and foundation or entry level, but not standard.
Yep. And if you have a look at the syllabus, the syllabi that are on the ACMA website, the three of them, when you get the foundation and the standard is formatted very similarly, but when you get to advanced, it's formatted totally differently, and that's because it is equivalent, has to have equivalence with the HARIC CEPT requirements. So yeah, that's Jim.
So could I just asking about this travelling internationally?
Yep.
Because it was after an overseas trip and I mentioned you some mountains I saw and you said you can go get your advanced licence. So I was good, I went and did that. Circumstances now, if let's pick New Zealand. If Linda was to travel to New Zealand because there was an event in New Zealand and the opportunity for her to operate from a station there, or I was to go to New Zealand and see a mountain and decide I want to walk up it and operate from the top of the mountain.
Yep.
Would we have to present our credentials in New Zealand, or can we just start operating straight away using an Australian call sign, announcing that we're operating within ZL?
Correct, you can actually, because of arrangements that are in place between ZL and Australia.
So that applies to all the other nations that have...
Not necessarily.
So it could be different depending on where you go.
Well and truly.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. The only time I've ever been picked up is entering Los Angeles, and the customs people there were like gorillas. And what was this radio thingy you've got in your... Have you got a license for this? Here it is. And he sort of talking to me, and I was on my way to Dayton, and as soon as I said, "Oh, ham radio," the guy said, "Piss off."
Probably had 15 of them go through the airport in the morning.
I think you're probably right. And I've had the same thing happen leaving Germany and getting on the plane, and they searched my carry-on luggage. And I had everything crammed into that. It was like carrying a lead weight around. And he just opened it up, took one look, radio, and flicked his eyes upwards. It's funny. But all serious, it can happen. it's pretty unlikely, but you've just got to be prepared to have your documentation as much as you can. And yes, there is an issue with documentation. The WIA has been pursuing it for the best part of even before the class license was introduced. And in fact, in the first week of when they sent out the consultation paper, I sent through to the people that were doing this review a copy of what New Zealand documentation was like, and said, look, this is the style of documentation we would like to see. So they're not unaware of our concerns and aspirations to get better documentation, and we'll keep on pursuing it.
When you're going overseas, are you allowed to use a photocopy of the original, or do you have to take the original?
You can take a certified copy.
I can see some situations where the local gendarmerie might say, we don't believe this.
Yep, I understand that all of the variations, it even occurs here in Australia, for example. You get pulled over for speeding or something, and somebody spies this radio, or you've got a car with 10 million aerials stuck out over on the roof. And the question is, have you got a license for this? And I always carry a copy of my last license I ever had, plus the documentation that was sent out when they introduced the thing. I carry it around in the car, so I've got some documentation. I also have a phone number. Ring this number. It's a person at the ACMA.
Then you're getting into territory of whether the police are actually authorised to be able to confiscate your equipment, but.
Correct. That's another issue, but all in the regulations that are subordinate to the Act, most police officers are effectively appointed radio inspectors. Yeah, well, they don't know what they're doing.
Or vice versa.
Can I just also say about the certificate? So there is a little bit of a hack that you can do to get your Callsign certificate. So straight out the gate, when we moved to the class license, we didn't get our Callsign certificates. But if you actually apply for a new Callsign, which you can do because you can hold multiple Callsigns, you actually get allocated a Callsign certificate for that Callsign. So if you were going overseas and you really wanted a Callsign certificate, then you can either pay the ACMA for one, or you can get the cheapest Callsign that you can afford, and you'll get a Callsign certificate.
Yeah.
Look, the issue effectively is there is a system issue. A lot of government departments are restricted in their IT expenditure, and their hands are tied at this particular juncture.
So what this is the last slide. I just thought I'd point out we do have some significant improvements in moving to the class license, which is we now have a fee-free license. We don't pay anything anymore. We have effectively a license for life that's checked every 5 years. So to check whether you, I assume, still alive,
exactly,
or whether you want the license.
Still in the country.
Or well and truly.
So who checks it? Do I get an email saying,
you get an email.
Am I still alive?
Every 5 years.
If your details are up to date.
If your email address with them is correct.
Which is a requirement in the previous.
You need to update your contact details. Now, the other issue, which was highlighted by the recent ACMA performance survey that we sent out, the WIA sent out, was that of the 1,300 odd people who completed the survey, which was a great result, only about 40% of them have actually been and logged into the ACMA Assist portal. And the problem with that is just under 4 years' time, when the ACMA goes to send out your 5-year check and you haven't updated your contact details on the ACMA Assist portal, you're not going to receive anything because they don't send out paper. So that's an issue, which is why that appears in both the improvements and the challenges column.
What I suggest, Hayden did a very, very good video presentation on how to log into the portal and all that sort of stuff. And I think everybody should have a look at that to understand what is involved.
We'll put a link to that in there.
There's a problem with the title of that because it's called an assist portal. You don't need assistance.
It's an oxymoron, isn't it?
Very good, Rod. Very good. Now,
if you're already receiving emails from the ACMA,
you don't have to do anything.
Then
you're fine.
Somehow registered.
Yeah, well and truly. But the problem is, what they will do is email you and say, "Can you please go on to the ACMA Assist portal and check the box that says I'm still alive?" Or whatever.
That's not the box, just to be clear. That's not the box, just to be clear.
And it's pretty reasonably important because I suspect that there is a period of grace where that will occur if they don't hear from you. It might be 3 months or something like that, or numerous attempts to do it. But after that, your call sign becomes available. So it's reasonably important that you do check in. You don't have to wait for the 5-year period, but you can certainly go in there and let them know you're still alive.
You can check it. You can check it now if you go in there.
You can do it twice up to.
Does anyone know any hacks to actually get your email address changed when you don't actually have access to the email address that they have?
Yeah, contact ACMA.
Can I just say, the couple of times that I have actually rung the number, yes, you've had to wait for a little while, and not very long, but they have been incredibly helpful when I've contacted them.
I sorted that out.
So,
that's no problem.
So yeah, and it's you're talking to somebody in the ACMA. You're not talking to a call centre. So yeah, it's worth ringing them. Now, challenges, exactly what we're talking about. We don't have one document, and you can't apply for a call sign certificate or a recognition certificate.
So you mentioned before it couldn't be digital. I got one when I redid my call
Oh, no,
sign.
correct.
Yeah, can I print that out and that makes it okay?
Well and truly.
Okay.
Well and truly. And can I just say, though, it's the document, and this only appears on the advanced recognition certificates. It is the CEPT HARIC compliance statement, which is in English and French. And that's the thing that a customs official in some country is going to look at and going to mean something to them. It's not the rest of it. No. If you do your advanced license now, you'll get a recognition certificate. It's part of the process. You can't actually get your license without applying for a recognition certificate.
But if you've already got your license, you can't get a recognition.
Correct. But you have your hopefully you have your AOCP, which is the equivalent. So, and for advanced licensees, it has the HARIC CEPT statement on it. Can you sort of see the issue here? That we're trying to address?
I think Hayden did a very good work around. Just order another call sign.
Well, that gets you, but
that gets you the certificate.
That gets you your call sign certificate.
Doesn't get you the recognition one. No.
I'd just like to say, having taken an amateur radio to a number of countries without any paperwork, no one ever asks. So,
that's when they do, though.
It's the advanced license because it's free.
I've never even taken my license with me.
Or just get a call sign in the country that you're going to visit. Pass the test there.
There is another issue with call signs, and that's the issue of deceased amateurs and their call signs. So please advise your family members in the unfortunate passing, your unfortunate passing, that they can apply to the ACMA and get effectively a 2-year bar on it. And that has been agreed to, but you really need to contact the ACMA to indicate yeah. It's and the reason why for the period of 2 years is to allow for call signs, QSL cards and all those things to go through all the various systems around the world, and period of grace, I suppose.
Yeah.
So there's a whole lot of nuances that the ACMA staff that we were dealing with when all this, they just did not have a comprehension of all of the bits and pieces that were hanging off that are largely historic and negotiated over many, many years, in fact, decades, I suppose.
And the very last issue, which is under challenges, is the VK0, VK9 issue. So now, Peter, chime in here, but my reading of the tea leaves here is they handed the drafting of this particular section and left it to the lawyers who had a legal definition of external territories.
Yep.
Which did not align with the custom and practice of the amateur service. And so what we've ended up with is VK9. So Lord Howe Island's a good example. Lord Howe Island has reverted to VK2 because it's off VK2, when in fact it was not in the past. And also there's some issues around issuing VK0 and VK9 call signs to overseas amateurs.
Can you still get them for Christmas and Cocos?
But Christmas and Cocos is exactly the same issues. They're
an external territory.
In those cases, if you're actually a resident, a permanent resident in those, you have to pay an annual fee.
An external territory, you're still paying an annual fee for your amateur license.
How's
that work?
Well, good question.
Yeah.
You don't have to pay any tax. You can afford it.
Now, noting the time we've gone over, just mention one other thing is there has been an amendment to the former license condition determination, and there's all sorts of changes in there from what it was, but what it is there, it's not that they're reintroducing the assigned license again. It's the fact that there were quite a large number of licenses that were taken out for 5 years just before the implementation date of the class license. And these do not expire until 2028, I think it is. And so what they've done is made amendments to the LCD that aligns with the existing class license, so that when all of these 5-year licenses expire, and they're not going to be renewed, effectively the operator is under the terms of the class license and not the former LCD. So I think that's a reasonably wise move. So there'll be a smooth transition from, and there's not, well, there are a reasonable number to actually make them put a little bit of horsepower into doing all this work.
Okay. Thanks, Peter. Jim.
On the VK0, VK9 topic. So at the moment, just thinking in relation to Antarctica, there's basically only one way that an Australian's going to get there. That's if you get picked up by the Antarctic Division. So if a person gets picked up in a role down there, and you also happen to be amateur radio operator in Australia, and so in your time off down there, you think, I'm going to set up a station and operate, is a VK0, is the prefix still available? Or not available?
I believe it is.
Yes, it is. It is still available.
Okay. Yeah. Look, there's always going to be exceptions to the norm, but they're not going to upset the apple cart over such a trivial thing. If you're going to be there for a period of time, which will be generally a year, no problem.
VK7JZ Portable Zero. That sounds great, doesn't it? It'd be great on the QSL card.
Well, it's another one of these exotic ones.
Definitely. Now, questions? Any other questions? Greg.
Who's the natural person for VK7OTC?
Me.
The club call sign custodian.
Club call sign, the WIA call sign. That's it. Is me.
And that's for life?
Under the former club licence arrangement, there was always a nominated person from the club that effectively was the custodian and of that particular call sign. And that's effectively what's carried through, is that same person now is the person that's responsible under the class licence for the club licence, or the club licence, I say.
The interesting question here, Peter, is, and I've always thought about this, is the various WI call signs which are used for the broadcast. Who's the custodian of those?
Well, in some cases it'll be the former state. I'm talking about AR New South Wales, ARV, but all the other call signs effectively are registered to the federal, the national office. We pay for them.
Yeah. No, I knew we paid for them, but I just wasn't sure under the new arrangements where it has to be a natural person. Just when.
Let's not go there.
Righto.
Yeah. So it's an ordinary licence.
No, it's well and truly. Well and truly.
And do you do that once, or do you have to do it every year, renew it every year?
No,
it's a process for changing it.
It's just exactly the same as the. So in the portal, in the Assist portal, you can attach other licenses. So you see a number of other licenses.
Except in our situation with our club, we've got our own account.
Correct.
For the club.
Yeah, because we've got a whole lot of
its name attached to it.
repeaters attached to that.
Yeah, I think clubs that have got repeaters, they've got multiple licenses, and they'll have a client ID number, which is how it all binds together.
So it's my call sign in. No,
it's your name tied to the club account.
Yes,
with the club call sign in it.
Correct.
And the WIA call sign.
Yes.
That appears twice.
As many times as required.
Is it a very popular person now, Justin?
So does that count to your 5 call signs?
Excellent question. Don't know.
I don't think it does.
Now, for those people who don't know, you've got a limit of 5 call signs. That's part of what came in with the class licence.
Yeah. It was striking a balance. Some people wanted as many as they could get.
No. Now, okay, in VK7 and the smaller states, 2-letter call signs aren't an issue. because there's lots available. But in VK2, VK3 and VK4 and VK5, I think, they've run out of them. They're so there is a ballot held. If one becomes available, there is a ballot arrangement held because it's sought after call sign, 2-letter call sign. So, yeah.
I've got a curly question.
Okay.
What constitutes a contest for a contest call?
Oh, you had to ask that.
Crikey. How long does the contest run for? Oh, a year.
Well,
365 days of the year.
Can we run a whole year contest and use our call signs whenever?
Well, there is one particular organisation that claims this is what they're doing.
All right, I'm just staring you up.
Yeah, he's just staring.
I know
that. No, I think the official thing is if it's an official contest that is well known and well run constantly, then it's Yep. Is that part of our 5? A contest call?
Sorry?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well and truly.
It's supposed to save time, but they're just a pain in the ass when you try and put it into your log software.
Yeah.
What did you say?
VJ 4A.
No, well, it's
I'm thinking VK3W.
Is that your contest call sign, is it?
Yep.
Nice NCW.
Well, I had a favourite ship I was on. The call sign was VJAE. So that's hence where the VJ came from.
Okay. Now, Peter was a former Maritime Radio operator. That's where he started. So,
go to my QRZ page, you'll see me. I had more hair in those days and strapping young guy. And it was really fun, you know. Could play radio and they paid you for it and saw the world. Why would you?
Now, any final questions? No? Okay, can we show appreciation of Peter?
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Peter.
No problem. Thank you, Justin.
Not a problem. I'll be in touch.
I'll see you.
Okay, see you. Cheers.
Good night, everyone.